Hey everyone, welcome back to my shop. Today we got a fun build for you. I'm calling it a wide dresser. We got a couple of wide drawers, a couple of narrower drawers. This is just about 42 inches tall, just under 54 inches in length, and about 18 inches in depth. It was a fun build. We did some new things. We've got a little secret to show you later on. I also went ahead and did some epoxy work, which I don't always do, but with this hickory I did do that, and it looks really good. I'm really happy with that. Stick around, we'll get into the build. So as we get started here building our carcass for this dresser, I decided to build a wide drawer dresser like this. I've been looking at these for a while, and it's a design, it's a style that hasn't really appealed to me too much. But I just decided that I wanted to go ahead and build one anyway. And as I built it, I've actually decided that I really do like it. The wide drawers fit a lot of clothes or whatever you want to put in there. I was able to keep it a little narrower than some of the dressers that I build. And so as I build this skeleton for the dresser, or the carcass, I used plywood and I cut those into strips. Usually those strips I'll cut between about 2.5 to 3 inches wide, and then I'll run the groove down the edge of the stiles generally, and then I'll cut the tongues on the rails. And here's just a piece of scrap so you can see that edge that's got the groove down it, and then I'm also cutting the tongues on there. That's just a piece of scrap so I can set up my jig. And as you can see there, that joint's still just a little bit too tight. So with a little fine adjustment on that jig, we'll run that through again a couple of times. We'll catch both edges of that. Make sure we have that centered. And that's a much better fit. That's what I'm looking for. So we'll go ahead and run the rest of those tongues on the rest of those pieces. So yeah, we'll go ahead and glue up those frames now. A little glue on the tongues, and then we'll slip those together. Apparently a little dust was getting me there. And some clamps to clamp that together, and then I'll go ahead and just pin nail those with some 5/8 inch brads. And that way I can free up those clamps and move on to the next frame. And then here you can see I've already run some dados through there, so I just kind of simulated that again because I forgot to do that. Forgot to film that for you. So we're back with some more plywood. This is a piece of pre-finished plywood. This is going to be the top shelf, and I'll show you a little later in the video why we used some pre-finished plywood for that one. And then I'm just go ahead and running some dados on the other frames. That was the top frame, and then this is that pre-finished shelf that we just cut. And that will be the center divider between the two top drawers. And I'll just put a couple of brads in across those joints. I would typically run brads in across the joint and then straight through the joint, and just whatever I can to help strengthen that joint while the glue dries. The glue is going to do most of the work there, but those pin nails will help hold that together as well. And then we'll just assemble the rest of the carcass. Glue and nails in all the joints. So I went ahead and installed the back piece of plywood, just a 1/4 inch piece of plywood, and I use usually narrow crown staples as well as some glue on all of that. And then this is some panels, some hickory. We finally started working with some hickory here, and I'm trimming those end panels down to size. And as you can see, I trim off both sides because I generally will glue those up in a book match, and I want to keep that center line right down the middle of the panel. And then I'm just cutting some rabbets around the panel. This is a 3/8 inch thick panel, and I cut those down to fit my 1/4 inch grooves. And as you can see, I have to cut a little deeper. I'll go back and clean up those edges by moving that fence over just a little bit and running those pieces again. And then I have also milled the rails and the stiles, and I am gluing those together and assembling this end panel. And I have pre-finished those end panels. I used Natura 1 coat on this, which is very similar to Rubio monocoat, if you've heard of that. I really don't see much difference between those. I've used both products and both of them work really well. And I also checked that panel for square. And now I'm working on the stiles for the front that will attach to those panels, and I just use biscuits and glue to attach those front stiles to these end panels. I'll put a little glue on the biscuit and slip those in the slots. And then, as you'll see here, I'll run glue down the edge of the panel, make sure I get it into the slots for the biscuits on that, as well as spread the glue nicely down that edge. And then I'll just go ahead and put those pieces together and clamp it. And I'll usually let those sit in the clamps for at least 45 minutes to an hour. I usually have something else to work on, and so oftentimes they'll just sit there until I'm ready to use them again. And so I'm going to go ahead and clamp these end panels to the carcass. And I will put a little glue on these as well, where I build a frame and panel style end panel like that. I don't have a lot of wood movement issues that I'll need to worry about. So I will put some glue in some spots and then screws as well. And I did pre-drill for those screws where this is hickory. It's such a hard wood that it's good to pre-drill anytime you're using screws in it. So now I'm just milling up a little more hickory. These will be for the rails for the face frame. And I'll go ahead and measure those right off the cabinet, and then I'll cut those to length. And I'll cut those just a little bit long. If you can see that little mark, I'm still just a little bit long on that. And that way I can go back and forth and just make sure I get a nice tight fit. And then more biscuits and glue to attach those to our frames. And here I'm attaching that center divider that will divide the top two drawers. Just using pocket hole screws for that and some glue. And then of course more biscuits and more glue, and we'll clamp those to the frames. And as you can see here, we got a nice tight fit. Use my rubber mallet just to persuade those into place, and then some clamps to just hold some pressure on there while the glue dries. Alright, so I'm getting started in the shop today. I've milled up this piece of hickory. I've glued two boards together to give it 1.5 inches thickness, just over 1.5 inches. And these are going to become the feet on our dresser here. What we're going to work on today is cutting that profile into this length of hickory. So I'll go ahead and use the table saw to cut this cove portion out of this piece of hickory. And as you can see there, I'll just set the height of the blade to the top of that cove. And then I'm just sighting down it by eye to get close to that to kind of see how the blade's going to go across there. And then I'll go ahead and lower the blade back down to about 1/8 inch above the table, and we'll just slowly cut that out as we go across the blade like that. This is a technique that works pretty well. It's a little bit tricky, so if you've never done that before, just proceed with caution and raise your blade just a little bit at a time. And you can see here we're getting close to that profile. As I go, I'll adjust my fence across there, the angle of it a little bit, and that'll kind of help us get a little closer as we get close to that. And as you can see here, that's going to get us really close to the profile that we're looking for. And so I just continue to raise that up until I get to my line. And now I'll go ahead and run off this through the table saw with at a bevel and just knock off some corners to help save us on the next step. And there's what we've got so far. As you can see, we're really close to that. And so now I'll take a card scraper and knock down those corners a little more. And then the sander with some 80 grit paper, and I'll just work those until it's nice and smooth and round it over just like I want it. Now I'll go ahead and take my template that I made and I'll just trace that onto the back of that piece, and that'll give us our pieces that we need to cut out. And then before we cut those out, I'll go ahead and use the table saw just to cut the bottom part of the foot there with my miter gauge. As you can see, I've got a little stop block clamp to that so that I can get the length on that just right. And then I'll go ahead and also cut the miters on the front corners. And this is a lot easier to do before I finish cutting out that profile. It just gives you something to put up against the miter gauge. And then we'll go ahead and just cut that profile out with the bandsaw, getting close to the line. And there you can see our pieces cut out. And over to my oscillating belt sander and spindle sander, and I'll just sand those and fine tune those cuts and bring those to the line, and I'll just work on those until each piece is right where I want it to be. It takes a little time and effort, but it really makes for a good looking foot, and it's well worth the work. And then I will always use the biscuit when I miter those together. That'll help that miter stay together. And plenty of glue on both sides of the miter with that end grain and then being a miter joint, because they like to open up sometimes. I'll make sure we get plenty of glue on those. And then as you can see here, it's plenty of clamps, and I'll just try and clamp it and squeeze it and do whatever I got to do to hold that into position while the glue dries and sets. Sometimes it's a little bit of a game. And that's what we end up with. So another piece of plywood back over to the carcass, and this is the bottom part of the back. I just needed to put in a filler piece there. And then we're also using some plywood to attach to the feet. This is how we'll attach it to the bottom of the case. And that's another plywood frame that I've attached to the bottom of the case, and I will attach the feet to that. Now we're taking a little break from that, and we're going to fill some knot holes and some cracks with some epoxy. I don't always do this, but this hickory has some big voids and cracks, and so I did go ahead and use epoxy on this one. And now we're back over to the router table using the multi-profile bit to cut some trim pieces for the bottom of the case there. And then to the table saw, we'll cut those out. And then one more trip through the router table to round over the bottom edge. And then some glue and some pin nails. I'll attach that to the bottom of the dresser there, and as you can see, I'm covering up that plywood frame that we attached, and that gives me a good backing. And so now we're back at the top of the dresser, and I've cut out some notches that we'll need a little later on, and I'll show you what we'll be using those for. This is the underside of the top of the dresser, and I'm just using my router to cut a dado into that with a straight cutting bit. And now I'm going to go in there with a dovetail bit and cut a dovetail slot. And that straight bit was just to take some of the work and stress off of the dovetail bit and clean out some of that sawdust so I can get my router back out of there. And there's our slot. Now I'm taking that same dovetail bit and running that into the edge of another piece of hickory, and this will be slid into the underside of the top, but first I needed to round over the bottom edge before I put those in. Back over to the table saw to cut another cove, working on another piece of trim. And this is designed after the base, the feet. And I actually spent quite a bit of time here creating this piece of trim and then ended up using very little of it, which you'll see a little later on. I had kind of a different idea that I was going with, and I just in the end didn't really care for how it looked, so we used a couple of pieces from it, and you'll see that later on here in the video. Little card scraping action to smooth up those cuts. Cutting those coves on the table saw takes a little bit of time, but they're well worth the process. And then just trimming off the waste that I don't need. And we went ahead and installed the drawer slides for the top compartment. And I'm just attaching those to the top. Using the clamp just to make sure the slide doesn't move around. And there's a look at how that will work. It's still a little sticky, and we'll take a little bit of sanding and some finish work to smooth that up, but that was operating very well. Now some glue and attaching of those trim pieces that we made a little bit ago. And as you can see, I used just a couple of little small pieces from that. And we're back at the router table. I'm going to go ahead and make some trim pieces to go underneath the top. And you can see how we'll fit those up to there, and that's the corner there. We'll go ahead and glue and nail those. We'll be very careful to keep the glue off of the top. We'll just put a little bit of glue up against the case, and then also make sure we keep those nails away from the top. And that will allow that to slide freely as it opens and closes. We'll go ahead and turn our attention to our drawers now. This is the drawer front. I'm going to go ahead and rabbet each side. We're going to do a overlay drawer, and we're also going to dovetail the sides of the drawer to the drawer front. I've just got my dado stack in the saw with a sacrificial fence there, running those rabbets around the edge. And now I've got my regular saw blade back in the table saw, and I'm just going to run a groove down the edge of those, and this will be for a trim piece on the top part of the drawer, which I'll show you a little bit later. That will be made from hickory, and we'll just dress up the top of that plywood edge with some hickory later on. And then of course over to the dovetailing jig. I'm using the Lee dovetailing jig. I like this one because it's got adjustable fingers and you can kind of customize those dovetails. And I'm dovetailing the sides of the drawer here. And then we put the front of the drawer into the jig and we'll dovetail those pins. I've had this dovetailing jig for a long time. I don't always use it a ton, but I do like the adjustability of it. It's a very good jig to use for dovetails. Now we'll go ahead and just run a groove for the drawer bottom. And we have to make sure that we adjust the fence after we're running the drawer fronts to the drawer sides and the back, because of the overlay of the drawer front. We have to adjust that a little bit to accommodate for that. And then on the back I actually just raised the blade and cut that off. That will even that drawer back up with the bottom of the drawer. And then we'll just go ahead and I'll use some screws probably this time around to just attach that drawer bottom to the back. And we've got some 1/4 inch plywood that we've cut for the drawer bottoms themselves there. And then this is just a round over profile. I'm just doing a 1/4 inch round over all around the front drawer of the edge just to dress that up. And there's what the finished drawer front will look like. Of course, we'll add some handles and do a lot of sanding. We'll make sure we get plenty of glue on all the parts of the drawer as we glue up these dovetail joints. Some glue in the dados on the sides for the back. And we'll go ahead and set this drawer in the clamps. Make sure that it's square, and then I will go ahead and put some pins, some brad nailing into the sides and the drawer bottom just to hold that drawer square. And I will go back later on and add some screws to that drawer bottom just to add a little bit of extra strength. And there are the completed drawers installed into the case. And when I say completed drawers, I mean there is one more step that we got to do here. These are the top trim pieces that I was talking about just a few minutes ago. And as you can see, I just kind of make those into the shape of a T, and then just run a little bit of glue. I just cut those and fit those into the slots along the top of the drawer. And that just kind of dresses that up and covers up that plywood edge. And there's a little bit of soft close action on the drawers there. One more piece to work on the top section of the dresser, and that's to add the back. And I'm just going to screw this on. I'm not going to glue it. I'm going to put a fingerprint lock onto this, as you'll see me do here in a little bit. And I do want to be able to access that should I need to for some reason in the future, and so I'm not going to glue that. I'm just going to go ahead and screw. And there's that fingerprint lock. There are several different varieties of those, and that's one I just picked up off of Amazon. And now we've got one more little bit of set of trim to make here for our end panels here. So I'm using a beading bit there to run a bead along that edge, and then I ran that through the table saw just to remove some of the waste, and then back through the router table to add a cove to that piece of trim. And that'll kind of match the trim underneath the top and on the base, but it's a little smaller, and there I am installing it around those panels. Just some pin nails to hold those. I don't put any glue on that. And there's a close-up of that trim with those miter joints there. And I've gone ahead and added the finish. I've just used some Natura 1 coat, which is very similar to Rubio if you're not familiar with that. So we'll go ahead and install our hardware, putting the fingerprint lock back on. Installed the drawer handles as you saw. And there's the completed dresser. And I'd like to thank everybody for watching my video. I hope to put more of these out, so if you'd like to subscribe, that helps me out. If you'd like to share our videos, that helps me out as well. I do this, I just enjoy building these, and I like to share my work, and hopefully you enjoy my videos. Let me know what you think. I'm very much open to all comments and criticisms, so let me have it. So there it is, our wide drawer dresser. This was a fun one to build. Hickory was a little challenging to work with, but you can see it was well worth the effort. If you liked watching my video and you wanted to subscribe to my channel, that would be great. That helps me out a lot. Also, if you'd like to like the video, that helps out a lot. And if you also wanted to share the video, that helps out a lot. So I am a new channel and I'm trying to grow, and hopefully I can continue to bring these kind of builds to you. That's my goal, as I really enjoy doing it. And again, thanks for watching.